Today, we're going to talk about one of the hottest narratives and trends in Web3 and crypto space right now. And the rage is all about something called DePIN, which stands for Decentralized Physical Infrastructure Networks. Now, that may sound like a mouthful, but to help us demystify and blow the lid off the power of decentralized physical infrastructure networks is a power player in the Web3 space himself. Garrison Yang is the former VP of marketing for Avalanche, and now he's taking his experience and talents to IO.net, where Garrison is the CMO and CSO at IO.net. And from what I understand, you have some very exciting news to share with us about IO.net. But to start, I'm your host, Felix Cao, and let's welcome Garrison Yang to the Web3 Mission Possible podcast. Garrison, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great. Couldn't be happier, man. Like I
That,
said, been crazy times for the project personally. Got married on
oh,
Saturday. Uh,
congratulations.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, a lot of big
Moving
changes in your life for
a
sure.
lot of big changes. Yeah, moving forward on the project, moving forward in my personal life. So couldn't be happier.
That is awesome. So let's start with that. So there's no better way than to kick off this show other than with the thrilling news about IO.net. So what is this amazing news you could share with us, Garrison, that's going to be happening at the end of this month?
Yeah, so IO.net is launching its token, and that's super important for a lot of reasons, right?
Hmm.
IO.net first was made public actually in November, and since November, we've been growing very quickly, but the platform is actually not in its final form, right? Because it's missing that crypto economic uh, collateralization,
Hmm.
security, and incentivization mechanic. And so once the token is actually live, the platform is going to function and feel a lot more like how it should be, right? Where it has a true like kind of Web3 integration with the network. And so we've been waiting for this moment for, gosh, feels like a while, but only 5 months. And we're happy to be here.
That is awesome. So what's the name of the coin by, for example, so that people are aware of it?
Yeah, it's just going to be IO.
Perfect. So how would somebody participate and be able to access that token, for example? Or is it found on an exchange or do they buy it directly from through your website? If you could share that information, then the listeners could get and participate in the launch itself.
Yeah, so the token will be listed on major exchanges.
Hmm.
They'll be available, across the world depending on your region. And of course, we'll also make sure that it's available through decentralized exchanges as well.
That is exciting. Yeah, because that's the whole point of Web3, right? Is adding that tokenization side to it. So that's exciting that by the end of this month, you'll be able to make that public and then have people come in and participate on that particular level as well. So about that, let's talk about now and really demystify DePIN, for example, because we've been hearing that word a lot in the Web3 and crypto space. But to a lot of people, they're not familiar with that term at all. So is that, in your opinion, like a brand new term, or is this something that currently exists, but there's nuances or Web3 capabilities that have built on top of it so that it's easy for somebody to understand? Like, how would you, explain it to, like, in layman terms to somebody who has this come across the term DePIN?
It's a great question. Deepins are actually not all that new. In fact, the
Mm-hmm.
terminology has been around for a couple of cycles now. For those who are familiar with Filecoin, which is a decentralized physical infrastructure network that's focused on decentralizing CDN or file storage,
Mm-hmm.
people would be familiar with the concept. It was very popular in APAC, especially last cycle. And this concept of distributed systems and decentralized systems are also not all that unfamiliar either. In fact, blockchains themselves are deepins, right? They
Mm-hmm.
are decentralized distributed systems with a physical hardware component, the nodes or the validators. We
Right.
are all probably pretty familiar with how something like power grids work or how the internet works. I mean, these are all distributed, some are not decentralized, but distributed systems.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about decentralized physical infrastructure networks, that physical infrastructure network portion should be very familiar. Adding the decentralization in front of it basically just means that you've got a bunch of distributed unrelated owners, right, of the
Mm-hmm.
various nodes that make up the network.
That's perfect there. So yeah, as you mentioned with Filecoin, they're in the storage capacity, right? So whereas IO.net is providing GPU power. So in that case, how would that look in terms of the kind of like the business structure of it? So you'd have like the users, the capacity providers, and how does that all come together, for example, so that people understand, let's say the entire business model around, let's say IO.net as a service.
Yeah. So IO.net is more than just a DPIN, right? The
Mm-hmm.
DPIN portion is really important because it allows us to provide the service that we want to provide. ultimately, our goal is to be kind of like a decentralized AWS, right?
Okay.
With some nuances. Um, a good way to think about IO.net is we're kind of like Google Flights, right?
Hmm.
So you've got all these different online travel agencies. They've all got this travel information and flight information. They have this supply that's in each of their networks. And then you've got Google Flights, which sits on top of all of that, aggregates it, provides it to its users in a very simple to use UI. And then it also abstracts away the buying flow, right? You can buy some of these flights directly on Google.
Hmm.
We do something similar. We do have our first party networks. We've got 300 something thousand GPUs and CPUs in the
Wow.
network that users and deployers can cluster today. But
Hmm.
we also think of ourselves as a DePIN of DePINs. So we partner with other DePINs and other decentralized networks so that we can aggregate and provide their capacity in a cluster to our deployers as well. By doing this, right, we become an
Hmm.
aggregator of the aggregators, and it allows us to have pricing power for our customers to make sure that one, they're getting access, right? Two, they have the most choice, flexibility in where they want to deploy, the speed at which they want to deploy, options for the hardware that they want you to deploy. And of course, there's also cost, right? The more optionality you have, typically the lower the cost as well.
I love that. That was actually going to be one of the next question is, how does, for example, IO.net interact with all the other DPINs, for example, right? And you just had mentioned it. It's an aggregator of aggregator. And it's really good to see the industry mature and evolve where it's not so much segregated anymore. Now you're starting to see, people within the same, let's say, sector really work hard together, right? So here you're providing almost like a one-stop shop where, they don't have to go through, a different place to find out, like decentralized storage or decentralized GPU power, but they could come to you, for example, but yet, and you have all the partnerships that could really make that experience a lot seamless to onboard the everyday user, right? So in terms of the everyday user, how does your ideal customer avatar look like from, is it like a regular person that's just, let's say in their, for example, in their room that is looking to, for additional decentralized networks and storage power, for example, or GPU power, or are you looking for like a large enterprise to really come in and really adopt the technology?
All the above. At the end of the
Hmm.
day, IO.net is actually a generalized compute layer, right? It's
Hmm.
decentralized, but it's a generalized compute layer, which basically means that the network is capable of running any type of workload. Because of the kind of moment in technology that we're in, right? AI is very much in
Yeah.
focus. And AI is also one of the harder challenges to solve when it comes to workloads, right? I think the only thing that is probably up there with AI in terms of complexity is
Hmm.
probably cloud gaming because of the real-time low latency requirements.
Yeah.
But AI typically has massive workloads, enormous data sets, requires an immense amount of infrastructure in order to manage costs. And also when you get to the inferencing portion, which is, serving ChatGPT, for example,
Hmm.
that also takes a lot of real-time, low latency networking, right? And you have to service customers from around the world. And so we always knew that if we could build something that could service AI,
Yeah.
then we would have something that is also capable of serving easier and lower end workloads, right? That being said, our ideal customer today and the customer that we see the most is typically like a mid-market, post-Series A, post-Series B
Hmm.
company in AI that is looking either to train models or to inference their load for customers. So something like a Gen AI startup
Okay.
or something like a AI chatbot startup where they're serving a few hundred thousand, few million customers. That's our ideal niche. That being
Perfect.
said, we've also seen individuals and researchers deploy on the network. We've also seen universities and educational institutions deploy on the network. We've got a quant trading firm that's on the network. And so you see these different niches and company sizes start to pop up as users.
That is awesome. Yeah, because right now there's a huge need in terms of the technology power that comes with powering AI, for example, or machine learning. As you mentioned, cloud gaming; those take huge bandwidths, right? So, with a new type of technology that's coming up and your role into it, you're making that a lot more, first of all, accessible, and then to be able to handle that latency in a way that's not lagging or causing major disruptions within the user experience. So we covered like the user side of it. Now let's talk about a little bit about the, let's say, the capacity providers. In regard to that, how does that look? Like you mentioned, obviously, it's distributed. It's we could describe them as nodes. It could be found across the world, for example. What are like how does someone actually become a capacity provider?
Very easy. The way that you provide capacity to the network is permissionless. So
Hmm.
if you have a piece of hardware that is supported and you've got an internet connection, you can connect to the network. You download our container, you run it on your device, and you're good to go. It's very simple, whether or not you are an individual with a MacBook or you're someone who's a crypto miner, you've got a rig at home, or maybe you're an enterprise miner or even an independent data center, right? We
Hmm.
actually have suppliers that fit all of these different profiles. And this is really important for a couple of reasons. One is that we have flexibility in terms of where the capacity comes from, and that provides for optionality in terms of price. Two, one of the innate advantages that a decentralized network has, right, is that it's very
Right.
distributed. And
Hmm.
so for those people who aren't, say, living right next to an AWS data center or not living next to a Google data center, if you're being served by something that is, say, your neighbor's miner in his basement, that might actually be a closer node to you. And depending on what kind of workload is running, that might actually be a better experience, right, than
Yeah.
dealing with the latency from the data center. I think the other thing that we see is that not everyone is sort of providing capacity just for mining purposes, right?
Hmm.
Because IO.net is actually solving a problem that companies want to pay for, which is providing access to compute, we're actually creating this economy that people can get involved in and access, right? A lot of crypto economics really rely on, say, performing a service, providing capacity or mining, and you're
That's right.
basically earning a token.
Hmm.
Here, the workers, right, or the people providing capacity, not only are they participating in crypto economics, but they're also earning revenue paid directly from the customers of the network. So in that way, you have this like really peer-to-peer marketplace that's happening as well.
Oh, so that's something that's a little bit different, or that like we typically that is like the reward is in the token. For example, if you're a capacity provider, you'll receive the token, the native token in return. But as you mentioned, there was actually another revenue stream that the capacity providers actually get a percentage of the revenue from the service. So is that am I understanding that correctly as well? So it's like
That's exactly right.
dual
But we
income
can
stream.
definitely get a bit deeper. Yeah, we
Yeah,
can
let's
definitely get a
let's
bit
dive
deeper
into
into
that because I
the
think that's
economic
very
model.
unique. Yeah. So if you're able
Yeah.
to share that,
So
I think it'd be
so you
valuable.
have so you have this two-sided marketplace dynamic, right?
Hmm.
But what's actually happening is you actually have a three-sided marketplace.
Okay.
So it might feel like it's an Airbnb, but because there's a decentralized network involved and we're using crypto economic security and shared incentives, you actually have three players in
Okay.
this marketplace. You have the buyers, right? The
Hmm.
people who are deploying, we'll call them users. You
Right.
have the people providing capacity, we'll call them suppliers. And
Hmm.
then you actually have another person who might overlap with both parties, but you have another player in the space, and um, that person is someone who is collateralizing the network, right? And so the way that this works is you have people who are providing capacity in the form of nodes. In
Hmm.
order to join the network, you need to provide a minimum amount of collateral, right? This is important because it prevents spamming of the network. Then, in order to earn, there are three revenue streams, right? You can earn simply by being available, which is idling, right? Think
Hmm.
about that as Uber drivers who are just driving around. Then you earn when you're hired, and that's the revenue that's paid by the user. And then you also earn if you are a collateral provider because you are securing the network, right, by providing collateral. And this is really important because when a node performs very well,
Hmm.
the user has a much better experience, right?
Correct.
When a node performs well, more people are likely to collateralize or bond against that node,
Hmm.
right? As the bond or collateral against the node increases, it means that the node, as a percentage of all the other nodes, earns more rewards.
Correct.
Therefore, that node becomes increasingly incentivized to stay online, be available, improve its performance, right? Both when idling and when hired, which
Hmm.
then provides a much better experience for the users because now you have nodes that are incentivized to perform. If the node does not perform, right, let's say it gets hired and the node goes offline, then some of that collateral is actually taken and given to the user as compensation, right? Because they paid for a service that they did
Right.
not get. And what that does is it penalizes everyone, right? The user gets a lower level of service, the
Hmm.
collateral providers lose some collateral, and the node has less earnings overall. And so you
Right.
have this really interesting shared incentives and shared penalty model in the system. But it's really important to do it this way because now you have three revenue streams for these workers, right? Again, you earn when you're idling and available, providing capacity on demand. You
Hmm.
earn again when you are hired, and then you also earn as a collateral provider. And some node operators may also be collateral providers and vice
Yeah.
versa. So,
So there's a lot of
there
overlap.
is definitely some overlap. Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. But it's interesting because everyone is participating in this economy.
I love that. So it's a way to, as you mentioned, secure the network. It provides a layer of high integrity, and at the same time, it gives back to the user experience. So altogether, it's like a flywheel, right? It just keeps on the positive
Exactly right.
reinforcement, keeps on just fueling the entire engine. So and then we see it as if it goes in the opposite direction, then everybody gets penalized at the same time. So everybody has skin in the game, regardless if you're a supplier, buyer, or the person who's providing the collateralization. So that's an awesome explanation, Garrison. So for the people who want to understand, how the entire mechanism work, like you just broke it down there in 5 minutes. So that's what we love here, right? We love to take complex and sophisticated concepts and be able to create them in very manageable and digestible portions there. So yeah, with that, so what, in your opinion, what industries, and they could be legacy industries or even within Web3, will be most impacted by DePIN?
So today we really focus on AI compute,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Right.
IO.net, in addition to operating this DePIN of DePINs, also has an orchestration layer and networking layer that is ideal and optimized for AI workloads. I
Okay.
really think that this is important because AI is one of the largest consumers of compute today.
Mm-hmm.
And without flexible and accessible options to compute, you're going to see one of two things happen, right? Either you'll see companies not able to access compute and therefore we're slowing innovation, or you're going to see costs rise for those companies, right? As they try to bid into a system that is sort of dominated by large players. And in both cases, what you end up seeing is value accrual and attention accrual of an entirely new industry against a very small set of companies, right? And usually a very small set of international players, right? Global
Right.
players. And I think it's really important for DePINs to exist because one, these things are globally accessible, right? They're
Mm-hmm.
permissionless, no long-term contracts, no surge costs, anything like that. And that allows for anyone to deploy for whatever time that they need to, right? And that's really good for sparking innovation and driving innovation outside of the typical regions that we consider to be tech hubs.
Right.
The second is that we provide accessibility to smaller companies, right? The long
Mm-hmm.
tail. And this is good because, again, not everyone can sign multi-year contracts with centralized cloud providers. Not everyone can afford to pay or want to pay that much. And this gives us an opportunity to work with those companies, right? And then I think the the third kind of or maybe separate set of companies that we really want to impact today is actually Web3 companies.
Mm-hmm.
And so, we've seen this rapid centralization of Web3 infrastructure, right? And of course, again, a lot of the value accrual is the centralized cloud providers. Crypto went through an incredible growth cycle a couple of years ago, and it's going through another one right now. And in the race to launch blockchains and launch app chains and launch rollups and launch all this Web3 infrastructure, a lot of companies naturally hosted it on centralized cloud. And so something like 70+% of validators today are hosted on centralized cloud. And ultimately, we want to move back towards progressive decentralization, right? And before now, there actually was not a lot of focus on decentralized compute. And so
Mm-hmm.
there weren't a lot of options in the space. But one of the things that IO.net really wants to do as part of the Web3 community is to provide a cheap, flexible, and easy to use option that can
Right.
compete against centralized cloud,
AWSs and so
especially
forth.
hosting Web3 infra. Exactly, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. AWS, Google Cloud, et cetera. Right. And it's funny because hosting Web3 infrastructure is really not all that intensive. It's just a lack of options in the market, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
we really want to focus on sort of that work stream as well for the company where we can have a lot of impact for our own community, right? Our own broader Web3 community. And then we also want to solve some of this AI problem because again, that's where the shortages are the most extreme, right?
Yeah.
Something like I read a stat somewhere where it was AI demand for compute is growing 10x every 18 months. And Moore's law is what, a doubling
Yeah.
in
It's
hardware
two
efficiency every
axes.
18 months?
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's really,
It's not keeping up
you
with it,
have this
right?
like enormous gap,
Yeah.
right? That just continues to grow wider.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so you're solving a huge challenge, as you mentioned, and that stat is absolutely mind blowing in terms of Web3 companies deploying their projects on centralized infrastructure, right? So it was like 80%, as you mentioned, and you're looking to now, move that towards a decentralized component. So that's a major challenge that you're currently tackling. So what other challenges that you see in the Web3, but more specifically for DePIN, that currently exist that you would like to see overcome over the next, let's say, 12 months?
So I think the biggest thing with DePIN today is sort of the immaturity of the ecosystem, right?
Hmm.
Like most things in Web3, the products that we're trying to build are higher friction
Right.
than what a Web2 company is going to be used to, right? Just by nature, the decentralization adds friction. I mean, for us, decentralizing and distributing the compute inherently adds latency, right? And
Hmm.
so one of the things that we've done is we've minimized that latency impact, but it's certainly still there. The second is that when you use AWS, right? It's not just about the compute. You're also paying for the ecosystem of turnkey integration, services, marketplace, managed services, access and support. Like these are all operational and company infrastructure pieces that most Web3 companies just don't have out of the
Hmm.
gates, right? And Web3 companies typically grow so fast that it's hard for them to build up some of these core competencies. And so for us, especially in the AI stack, right, there's all these people who are tackling different parts of the AI stack,
Hmm.
security, information transfer, data storage. We want to make sure that we're continuing to work with these partners. And we are also looking at our own platform and figuring out how we can make upgrades to quality of life, user experience, user interface, so that together as a decentralized provider and decentralized ecosystem of providers, we can produce a set of tools and services that make sense for Web2
And
companies to
tackle all those
use.
problems all in one go.
That's right.
That's perfect.
That's right.
So one of the things when I was looking at for example, if we backtrack to and have a look at the capacity providers, and as you mentioned, anybody could offer their, let's say, their device as a GPU or a compute provider, for example. Now, do you run into problems? Because remember how, like, if we rewind ourselves back in the early 2000s, there was like Kazaa, LimeWire, and it kind of worked the same way where you're downloading, let's say, a song off of someone's server, and it depended on like how well that software or the hardware would operate, and that would kind of dictate, assuming your bandwidth was okay, but how fast you would download the song, for example, or the file from the other server. Is that a problem in how like DPINs work today? So let's say that somebody has an older device, they're wanting to come on board as a provider, for example, or supplier. Is there like a test that they need to go through for and just to make sure that all their hardware is up to par? Like how does that look like in terms of like kind of like vetting, which ones are which people are could be really really good providers and provide the highest satisfaction for users?
Yeah, so there's definitely a minimum set of requirements that make sense, right? If you're
Hmm.
running a extremely slow internet connection, if you're using extremely outdated equipment, then it doesn't make sense for the network. You could join the network, but at some level, it's not useful to the network, right? And the rewards mechanisms are balanced such that we incentivize stronger nodes to join nodes that are more accessible and desirable by demand.
Hmm.
But that being said, it's interesting that you bring up BitTorrent and Kazaa because I was just thinking the other day that with all the advances in accessibility to higher internet speeds and better devices and cheaper storage, that we could probably relaunch something like BitTorrent or Kazaa and it would be
Yeah.
much more usable today, right? I mean, even our phones are more powerful than computers like 10 years ago. Then when I think about us, right, like applying that thought to us, I think that if you meet the minimum standards, right,
Hmm.
the way to solve that problem is actually even more decentralization. The larger the network, the more decentralized, the more distributed it is, the
Right.
less you have that issue, right? And the issue that you brought up is really a point-to-point issue, which is if my best option for service is 3 states away, that's not a lot of good options, right?
Hmm.
And just like data centers, just like AWS, right? You want to have nodes everywhere. It's just harder for data centers to provide that level of infrastructure in every region, which is why, again, one of the inherent attributes that are beneficial about DPINs is that it's more likely, assuming the network is large enough, that the closest node to you is closer than the nearest data center, right? And so as
Hmm.
long as, again, it depends on the workload, depends on the service, depends on the internet speed, but as long as those things are above a minimum bar, you might actually have better service providers, right, in the form of a DPIN. Then when I think about things like developing countries and rural areas, almost certainly with a large enough DPIN, you'd be able to access sort of better consumer service, right? Because
Hmm.
again, like the odds that you're next to a major data center node is going to be a lot lower.
Yeah. So I love that. Yeah. So the whole idea is like assuming the network is large enough, there's a high probability that you'll have, let's say, a node next to you where they'll have the hardware capabilities, and then you'll be able to run your all your data just off of that, right? As opposed to relying to, let's say, a
Right.
centralized data centers, and the closest one could be, a couple states away, and that would obviously impact the entire user experience. So, yeah, what's the best way, in your opinion, to onboard users and capacity providers, for example? And especially this is important as you get ready to launch. One of it is obviously the IO coin, but I'll let you take it over here, and that probably ducktails into what it is that how you're looking to really get out there when you launch by the end of this month.
Yeah, so I think one of the wonderful things about IO.net is that we're actually creating this economy that didn't previously exist, or perhaps a better way to put it is it's a previously inaccessible market for the average person, right?
Hmm.
So compute is, Sam Altman was saying this, right? Compute is the most valuable resource of our generation, something along
Yeah.
those lines. It certainly is, right? Compute is literally digital oil, especially for I think, this technological revolution that we're going through. And so if it's such a valuable commodity, right, why can't your average person get exposure to it, participate
Hmm.
in this economy? It's really difficult, right? Unless you're a data center operator or someone in the business and you're kind of buying and selling these hardware GPUs. Well, you could actually still buy a GPU as a consumer, right? Certainly spend $17,000 in A100. And because of how in demand these things are, even though it's hardware, these things actually appreciate on the secondary market.
Hmm.
But more importantly, previously you couldn't do anything with it, right? Like
Yeah.
there's no way if you own these things to generate yield, to participate in a market. And when you have something like IO.net, which again is sort of a marketplace model, right? That creates the matching of supply and demand and allows for more people to monetize these assets. And I think that's super important, right? Because again, if compute is digital oil, right? It kind of needs like its marketplace, first of all, but it also kind of needs like its petrodollar, right?
Yeah.
Like US dollar is how you settle and transact in oil.
Hmm.
And also, for us, IO, we want IO to be the currency in compute.
That is perfect. Yeah. So what the main thing is, and a lot of people don't see it that way, is the marketplace that you create to really bring together the buyers and the suppliers. So I think that's absolutely key, and also the partnerships that you're forming as well. So, what are some, let's say, ideal partnerships moving forward that you're looking to really form and create? So that'd be because we'll have people of all different backgrounds listening to this podcast. So anyone that comes across any of those lanes, Garrison is the person to get a hold of. So I'll let you share
We think
some of
about these
those.
partnerships, yeah, in like three buckets, right? So you
Hmm.
have the customers, right? So our team is working with AI companies, big and small companies that are training models, tuning models, inferencing and serving end consumers.
Hmm.
Come talk to us, right? We're providing compute at a much lower cost. In the middle, you sort of have these service providers. And so we're working with companies that are advancing privacy, security, AI as a service, modular tools for AI companies, right? Again, we want to build that ecosystem of
Yeah.
tools and services so that you can compete with a centralized cloud provider that has all these integrations out of the box. And then we also want to work with suppliers, right? Whether you're an individual with a reasonable internet connection and maybe a gaming PC, whether
Hmm.
you're someone who has a crypto miner at home, whether you're an enterprise miner, whether you're an independent data center, we work with everyone across that spectrum to make sure that they can onboard onto the network and then drive demand for their hardware.
That is perfect there. So as you're looking to grow, so we just touched on, what are some of the ideal partnerships that you're looking for. So also on an internal level, is there any specific talents or positions that would help IO really take off?
We're always hiring engineers.
Hmm.
There's you can never have enough engineers.
Yeah.
Network engineers, DevOps, ML engineers. We also run our own Gen AI platform called BC8, which
Okay.
is currently text to image, soon to be text to video, and then text to 3D, fully hosted on IO.net's DePIN. And of course, people who are in BD or marketing, feel free to apply. We're growing super fast. The team 6 weeks ago was 20 people. Now we're 80. And so,
Oh,
we've
you
been very
four
fortunate
x.
to 4X. Yeah,
Yeah,
we've been
that's
really fortunate.
crazy
We
growth.
raised a, yeah, we raised a pretty
Hmm.
monster round, I think 40 mil on a billion.
Wow,
And
congratulations.
we're
That's
really
huge.
using that. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah,
we're using that to propel us towards this token launch at the end of April and like really accelerate our growth going into the end of the year. We've got some big plans.
that is exciting. So what we'll do is there's a link. Is there a link on your website that has careers
There
or so
is.
forth? So
There
we'll
is,
put
yeah.
that in the link as well. So, anybody who's interested in joining Garrison and the team over at IO, then make sure to get in touch with Garrison here. So let's move to our last questions here. So, what are your predictions and forecasts for Web3 and DePIN for 2024? So in terms of its evolution, for example, over the next 12 months.
So I think you're going to see a lot more deep pins pop up.
Hmm.
That's already happened, right? We've got a
Yeah.
lot more hardware networks, and for us, we're actually looking to partner with as many networks as possible because again, we're sort of an aggregator of aggregators.
Yeah.
I think that you're going to see a lot more companies start to get over that education hump
Hmm.
and start to tap into deep ends. Like it's a lopsided market, right? You've got a lot of demand, not a lot of supply. Yes, there's friction in the middle. Yes, there's some trade-offs to using deep ends, but there are some really fantastic use cases. And I think that the companies that can make those trade-offs reasonably are going to start looking for just better opportunities, lower costs, more accessibility in a decentralized network. I think you're going to see a lot of service providers pop up because as you see more demand and more supply, it'll make more sense to build a company that is providing like various portions of the
To meet
DePIN
the
or AI
demand.
stack.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then lastly, and I think for the crypto people out there, I'm seeing this really interesting DeFi ecosystem pop up. You've got some really fun companies that are doing merge mining as a
Hmm.
service. You've got companies that are doing liquid staking protocols,
Yeah.
which then allows for DeFi like borrow lend, right? Like leverage that are popping up on top of these DePINs. And I think we're in for a really interesting moment in crypto where there we had this like layer one, layer two boom.
Hmm.
I think we're going to see a DePIN boom and then the entire ecosystem that evolves around DePINs. And the winning DPINs, right, are going to be the ones who recognize that you can take a hardware network
Yeah.
and serve a real world need, right,
Hmm.
within a niche like AI,
Yeah.
bootstrap your node set using real economics, not insular inflationary economics,
Hmm.
and then launch a chain. Because blockchains are DPINs, right?
Yeah.
And DPINs that serve some kind of external use case and drive revenue are a much more sustainable and really better way to
Long-term growth.
grow a node set for a blockchain. I mean, you look at a blockchain like Avalanche is a really good
Yeah.
example, right? I think Avalanche C chain is 18,900-ish. Sorry, not 18,000. It has 1,900 nodes, I
Hmm.
think. That's an all-time high,
Yeah.
right? Count the subnet nodes. Like, let's call it like 4,000 validators.
Yeah. It's pretty
That's a lot of
significant.
validators for a blockchain.
Yeah.
Pretty significant. And you look at IO.net and you've got 330,000 nodes, right? The CPUs alone, there's 30,000.
Hmm.
And if today those hardware nodes are orchestrated to serve AI compute workloads,
Yeah.
but it's not a leap of the imagination to just say, hey, let's turn some of these into validators, or let's give all of them the option to run validator loads, right?
Hmm.
And now you have a hyper decentralized blockchain with a lot of validators. And more importantly, you also have validators that are higher spec, right? Because
Yeah.
the traditional way of launching a blockchain, you want to lower the validator requirements so it's easier for people to join and they're validating to earn yield in your token, right? And so of
Hmm.
course they want to maximize yield by reducing capex. For compute depends, especially, you need to have a minimum level of hardware in order to even serve the market. And so typically the hardware is much higher spec.
Hmm.
And instead of inflating the token only, you're also pulling revenue in externally, those three revenue
Yeah.
streams we talked about. And that allows you to grow the node set much faster, right? And so it's still very early days, and I really want to see, us and some other players like make this transition that we're also doing it this cycle. But I think there's this really exciting opportunity. And again, the L1, L2 wars, right, and the DePIN wars are going to feel very, very similar.
Yeah, so that's an interesting evolution actually that you had this brought up because typically, yeah, we'll just think about the L1s and L2s kind of like their own category, like the foundation layer. But to think that D-pins can become part of that foundational layer, that's a totally different perspective. And with other partnerships that will happen, another way to obviously to really grow really really fast is through acquisitions as well. are you seeing a lot of that happen in the entire, like, for example, the entire Web3 space? And do you see that as something that will pick up or maybe slow down over the next 24 months as, let's say, you have more people, like, let's say that you have more, storage capacity, or more DPINs pop up, for example. Are the more established DPINs going to look to acquire them? Like, how does that look like moving forward?
Good question. I don't keep a super close eye on M&A activity in crypto because it's
Hmm.
not super common. I think if anything, you sometimes will see like acqui-hires
Yeah.
of whole entire teams, but it's rare, I think, for one project to acquire another. One, because you have a lot of these forked protocols, right? So there's a
Hmm.
lot of similarities
Yeah.
and everything's open source, right? Most things are open source. You generally will see sometimes merging of projects, especially if one is acquiring another project for like the treasury or
Yeah.
something, right? Where it's very similar. I'm not sure. I don't know if it makes a ton of sense for DPINs to acquire other DPINs because you're not buying long-term commitments on the supply side. Maybe on the
Hmm.
demand side, you've got contracts, but you're not buying a lot of commitments on the supply side. And certainly for IO.net, we're permissionless on both ends, right? So people are free to leave the network at any time. And so it wouldn't make a ton of sense to acquire unless you're acquiring the core technology or the team.
Or the
But
core team. Yeah.
it with the core team, yeah, but it's
Hmm.
something we should keep an eye on, right? I certainly expect a lot of merging. I
Yeah.
do.
Yeah, because I was just looking at like all the kind of like the past history. Like if you look at, I remember when I got into mobile in early 2010s, my mentor at that time was saying, "Hey, like what we're gonna see is kind of like a couple major players really start to own a lot of these companies." And at first, I was thinking, well, there's just so many different companies out there. Like, how could that actually happen? And then I remember one of the things is he had mentioned that all you do is just look at all the companies that Facebook had, or Google had owned, for example, and then you start to see that happen in the Web 2 or the mobile space. So my next question was, will this repeat itself in the Web3 and crypto realm as well? So, but you just gave a really good example of why that could not happen, or would not happen right away anyways, right? Because obviously when you make an acquisition, it's usually the team, the technology, but also has to make sense long term as well. So I guess we'll see moving forward into the future how that actually looks like in terms of
Anything can happen in
M&A.
Web3, I feel like. It's so
Exactly.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's the innovation of being in Web3 and crypto is just phenomenal. So the last question, Garrison, is, where can people go to connect with you and learn more about what you're working on?
So you can follow us on Twitter. We're
Mm,
at IONet. You can
perfect.
follow me on Twitter. I'm at 0xhushkey. We also publish a lot of content on YouTube and on LinkedIn. And then, of course, our website, which is actually getting totally relaunched on April 28th. Again, the version of io.net you see today is very much a beta. We're finishing building the new one. It's April 5th. We'll be done in 7 days. And you'll be able to experience sort of the full version of io.net. We've got great developer documentation that's updated all the time. Our Discord community is also booming, 500,000 people. I think we just hit the max,
That
so we're
is
trying to get
awesome.
that lifted.
Hmm.
But please join. We've got multilingual moderators. We've got channels for every region in the world. We've got a really bustling kind of group of folks in there. So jump in and join the conversation.
That is awesome. So we're gonna put all the links in the description below. And since you're getting ready to launch within this month, so this should be the final question. What is it that you want to be sharing about the launch to conclude this podcast, Garrison?
Look, the launch is on April 28th. We're
Yeah.
super excited. I think it's, one of the most anticipated launches of these next couple of months.
Hmm.
We've had an incredible partner in Solana, and we hope to be like a really big contributor to their chain. And so, if you have questions about the launch or where to go, how to participate, jump in Discord community, or someone from the team will help you. And I would also say prior to the launch, get involved, right? It's an early stage project. There's a lot of things that we're trying to fix, but if you've never experienced a DePIN, this is one of those things that in crypto especially, right, which is super financialized,
Hmm.
you don't need money to get involved,
I
which is
know
super
that's the
unique,
beauty.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
that
you don't
is.
need money to get involved, to learn, to experience what it feels like to be part of the network. Some people get hired, right? And
Yeah.
it's interesting to watch your node get hired and do work and get paid to do it. And so I'd say whether it's before the launch or after the launch, join, get involved, learn about this developing niche in crypto and
Hmm.
potentially developing niche in overall tech, and yeah, be involved.
Yeah, that's exciting stuff. So, are you doing any airdrops or anything like that? That
So we do have a points program.
Okay.
We have a points and
Yeah,
rewards program that is here to incentivize the growth of the network, and that information is published on our website. So you can go to the docs and read more about that.
I love that. Well, Garrison, what you shared with us today about IO.net and DePIN has been eye-opening and done in a way that's super easy to digest, by the way. So for anyone who's listening, make sure to check out IO.net for the upcoming launch and to follow Garrison and IO on LinkedIn and all their other socials. So as I mentioned before, all the links will be in the description below. And finally, if you found this video valuable, make sure to smash the like button and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Turn on that notification bell so that you'll be the first to get our videos the moment when we release them, because we bring on the best and the brightest minds in the Web3 and crypto space on this podcast. So once again, thank you, Garrison. And with that, we'll see you in the next one.
Thanks, Felix.
Awesome to have you